Next, we're going to talk about designing your booth space. So having a quality booth space is really important. And I would say probably one of the biggest questions we get when we go out and meet with people, they say, well, I want to do your show, but I don't know what to put in my booth. What would I do? And so we're here to talk a little bit about what makes a good booth space. So we have inside booth spaces, outside booth spaces, and gourmet booth spaces. And there will certainly be a different set of advice for every space that we have. If you're inside, outside, or gourmet, there are going to be some different recommendations. If you're an inside exhibitor or a gourmet exhibitor, you're going to have a setup that is going to be similar to this, where you're going to have this 8-foot tall drape here in the back. On the sides, you'll have 2 3-foot side rails that will separate you from the exhibitor next to you. Now, if you are a home and garden exhibitor, the depth of your booth space will be 10 feet. Gourmet is a little bit different, but you should still have approximately 10 feet. And then if you're an outdoor exhibitor, how many in here are outdoor exhibitors? Anyone? You are. Okay, great. So if you're an outdoor exhibitor, you're going to have not have any of the pipe and drape on your booth space. It'll just be a space outside, and we would recommend a pop-up tent to kind of identify your booth space and set some parameters. So when we talk about what makes a good booth space, there are several things that go into it. We selected this picture because we really feel like this is a very good booth space. And part of what we like is how open it is. So if you can see right in here, obviously we have the attendees who have come into the booth space. They're able to engage with the exhibitor and really collect valuable information. Had he chosen to put his table up here in front, he wouldn't have that opportunity to bring them into his space. And if you think about it as though your booth space is like a miniature business, you really want people to come into your booth space. So it's extremely important to make sure that you're coming into the booth space. The other thing that makes his booth space really nice is his signage in the back. And so we'll talk a little bit about signage, but the signage is good. The product displays he has here, he sells artificial turf. And so really he's got that touchy-feely, you can come up and take a look at it. And so those are all really important elements. Now, obviously, we do not want to create a barrier between our attendee and ourselves. So as the audience and the customers are coming into the booth space, you want to make sure, like we said, that they can enter the booth space, which is really important. And so again, we're talking about the table placement here along the side or in back can be a good option. What most people have a tendency of doing, especially if you've not ever worked a booth space before, is to put your table right up in front. And what that does is it creates a huge barrier between you and the person that's coming to talk to you. And as we said, face-to-face communication is really what's extremely valuable about these events. So you want the people to come in, you want to be able to look them in the eye and to really have that connection. And if you're kind of pouring over a table, it creates a psychological barrier. Now, I will say that if you're a gourmet exhibitor, obviously the tables change a bit. We do want you to put that table out in front because you're talking about a wine or you're talking about a food product. Most people will gravitate toward food and wine, as we all know. So they are going to, you know, that's going to be your selling point, is your food. So putting that out in front is going to be different. And in the gourmet section, we actually provide you with counter height tables. And so it, you know, obviously alleviates any bending over for you, as well as the attendee, they can come right up and grab your samples of food. But if you are working on a home and garden booth space or a home improvement business, you should definitely have a very open booth space. The other thing that's really important is that you don't sit behind your booth space, and we'll talk a little bit more about sitting. That you don't sit behind your table. So again, that really does create barriers. So we really recommend that you stand, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. In your booth space, you also want to think a lot about signage. So here we picked this. I really like this picture. These folks haven't exhibited with us for a little while, but they were faux finishers. She actually painted a picture of herself. Obviously, you can see the giraffe there. And it's just really a great engaging sign. So when you're looking at the booth space, you're like, wow, what is this? This is cool. We also have a painting contractor that has this really cool like cutout of a person. And he's like a painter guy with a paintbrush. And every time I walk past the booth space, I think it's a person and they've got him up on a ladder, and it's just very eye-catching. So you need to think about your signage. Is it eye-catching? What kind of backdrop is it setting? The other thing you want to think about with your signage is how high is it? Now, this exhibitor obviously has a very recognizable logo, which is certainly helpful in creating the message that we want to send. But it certainly could be seen from very far off, which is good. The other thing that's really important is your signage answering basic questions. So if you don't say in your name what it is that you do, which sometimes businesses don't, it's really valuable for you to actually list that on your signage. So here you can see they talk about replacement windows, doors, patio coverings, awnings, and more. So really it tells you what Darren's does. You also have Fence Factory here has a list right here of all of the different services they provide. So if your name doesn't say it, I would highly recommend, if you're getting signage, to put something short in there about what it is you do. Now, we don't want to over clutter banners and signs, which people do have a tendency of doing. You want it to be clear, direct to the point, and send a message, but you also want to make sure that it's including important information. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you put signage at eye level. So we talked about making sure you have signage that's high. So once your signage is high, then once I actually get to your space, I don't want to have to look up at your sign. I want to be able to see at eye level what it is that you do, especially if you're doing anything that is relevant to the product. So that, like Enhance is talking about this wood renewal. And so that's really important that that message gets sent and that it's something that can be at eye level. Lighting is also really important in a booth space. So I look at lighting like bugs are drawn to lighting, humans are drawn to lighting too, and it's just absolutely true. When you're in a big exhibition space, the lighting is not always great. It's very high and it can be very filtered, and depending on who may be next to you or what you have going on in your booth space, having a light that's actually shining in your space is really important. And so I think especially for signage, we really love this space setup. He actually purchased, you can see up here, they're just strip lights from halogen strip lights from Home Depot, and he did build a wall in the back. So he connected that to the wall, but it really lights his product up. So if you have a specific product that you are going to be displaying, lighting it up is good. If you have a sign, lighting it up is good. The other recommendation that we make is bring a table lamp from home. Bring a floor lamp from home. Just having some warmth in your booth space with that light can really make a big difference and have an impact on really how much people are stopping at your spaces. Now for gourmet exhibitors, in terms of setting your booth space up like we talked about, your product is really important, so having that offering out there is important. I also think that it's important for you to get creative. We've had people, they come and they bring their case of wine and that's that, and they've got maybe a little sign, and obviously when you're serving food and wine, people are attracted to that, but get creative with your space. This is Pomar Junction that did our show a few years back, and they went over the top. I mean, they are so themed, and they brought a really cute tablecloth. They just did an extremely good job at making a display that really brought in attention and brought in people. This winery up here is obviously going for a different level of class, and this was not a booth space at our event, but it really does communicate a very clear message about who they are. And I think that that's what's really important about your booth space in general, whether you're a home improvement professional or whether you're a gourmet company. It's important to realize that what you put in your booth space communicates the messages of who you are as an organization. One of my favorite stories is we had an architect exhibit in years past, and they were a very high-end architecture firm, and when we got to the show and looked at their booth space, we went, is that the same company? They were not communicating their unique selling proposition at the show in the same way that they should have been communicating, because they brought some kind of silly little signs and silly little pictures, and they did not fully communicate the caliber of their organization. So be really aware of that. What you are bringing into the show for your booth space really does present a very clear message about who you are and the brand you want to communicate. All right, now we're going to move to communication with our attendees. So it's so important. So you've put all this work into your booth space. Now you have to get down to the communication process. So how are we going to talk to our attendees and how are we going to engage them? So we'll talk a little bit about that. This is probably one of my least favorite pictures from shows, but this happens more often than not. This gentleman has decided that he would like to sit on his cell phone for a while, and who knows how many countless attendees passed by his booth space unattended to, potential customers that he missed out on talking to. So we want to talk about it. So sometimes, you might get a little bit unsure about who's working your booth space, but I think that, it's important to look at who is in your booth space. Do you have, and I have on here, is a crazy person working your booth space? The reality is some people hate people. And when I say they hate people, they just don't like that interaction. If you said, hey, I'm going to put you in a little room with numbers all day, they'd say, sign me up. If they said, hey, I'm going to put you in a booth space, you have to talk to 400 people today, they say, absolutely not, that's not what I want to do. So look at who is working your booth space. If you're a business owner and you hate the idea of your working your booth space, hire somebody to do it for you. Maybe you have a friend, maybe you have a relative, maybe you have an employee who is great with people. What we want in the booth space is we want someone who has high energy, who's excited, who likes to talk to people, who at the end of the day is going to be charged by talking all day. And one of my favorite stories is we had a masseuse at one of our health and fitness expos, and at the end of the day I said, how's it going? Was it today great? Didn't you have a good time? She said, no, it was horrible. I hated it. And she told me the next day, she's like, I just went home and cried last night. I talked to too many people. She did not have the ability to communicate with hundreds of people in one day. So make sure that whoever's in your booth space is charged. You put me in a booth space for the day, I can tell you at the end of the day, I'm going to go home and I'm going to talk to my husband for another hour because I'm going to be so excited about what happened. I like people, I like talking. So make sure that that is the person that's working your booth space. You want to make sure that you're interacting with the attendees. So your job that whole weekend is to interact with them, pull them into your booth space, and we have some recommendations on how you can do that. We suggest that you have some small talk ready. So you're going to have all these people coming through. What are you going to ask these people? Maybe you might ask them what brought them out to the show that day. What kind of home improvement project are they working on? What has their favorite booth space been that they've seen today? You just want to get them engaged in talking. And once you get them engaged in talking, then they're there. You want to make sure that you're staying positive throughout the day. When you work long trade shows, you're going to have times where you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many people coming through and this is awesome. And then you're going to have times where you're going to be like, oh my gosh, where is everybody? How did it just get so empty? Or you might have a competitor who you're like, oh my gosh, that competitor over there has been saying bad things about me or what have you. All of those things can make you not be positive. And in that moment, what you want to do is you want to be positive. You want to think about what you as an organization are doing to get that business, to get those leads, and to get the contact information. You should never badmouth a competitor. When you're in a trade show environment, we have a lot of competitors that are all in one space. You might have 2 or 3 or 4 people who you directly bid against all the time. It is not professional in any way to speak negatively about your competitors. Really, you want to focus on how you are doing and what are the positives of working with your organization. So really, I would recommend stay positive, don't badmouth competition. Qualify the leads in a timely manner, but remember that everybody can be in some way a lead. So depending on what it is you're selling, you should be able to tell, I would say within the first few minutes, is this somebody who could be a customer for you? Are they going to have the capabilities of making a buying decision with you? And if they're not, great, who do they know? If you are able to collect their contact information, their email information, or just talk to them. It happens so frequently when I've overheard people say, oh, you know, I'm not actually looking for a garage door, but my daughter is, and I'll collect your card and give it to her. Or, you know, I'm not looking for a new landscaper, but I know my neighbor is. Let me take that and I'll give that to my neighbor. So you don't know who you're talking to. The other thing that I think is really important too is that we all have a tendency to just judge someone. You look at them and you make a picture in your mind about who this person is. Do they have the ability to make a buying decision with you? And I would just really recommend that you not do that. We really recommend that you ask open-ended questions. So when you're in a booth space, you want to make sure that you're asking those questions that are not going to result in either a no or a yes. So what is your favorite booth space? Or which home improvement project are you working on? So those are all open-ended questions, and those are things that I think that you should have to be prepared to talk about. Be warm and welcoming. Kind of that goes back to the whole personality of who is in your booth space, who's working there. You want to make sure that you are warm and welcoming, that you are inviting people into your space. You're either asking them, you know, sometimes people will create even a little sitting area where you could do quotes or things for people in their booth space, but create an area where you can bring them in. So it's extremely important to stand in your booth space. Now, it's going to be a very long weekend, but you really want to make sure that you are standing up. And the reason is, if I walk up to somebody and I'm here, we're not at eye level anymore. Suddenly I feel like I'm imposing on this person. So if this person is maybe on their phone, maybe taking notes, I might not want to interrupt them. If you're standing in your booth space, people will walk up to you and they'll be at eye level, so you'll be able to make that connection, and that's what's really important about standing. Now, if you're like, there is no way I can stand all weekend, I would recommend bringing like a bar height, you know, bar stool or chair. Those work really well because you're still at eye height or eye level with that person, and you can rest. So I just would really, really recommend not sitting if you can do that at all. The other thing is to be likable. People like people that are like them, and that's just one of those things that, I don't know if you guys have seen, I think it's a credit card commercial, but I always laugh at it, where you, like, I think it's Discover, where you call and the person on the other line is like the exact replica of the person calling. I always laugh at that because really, when you talk to somebody, you want them to be like you. You want them to react the way you react. You want them to think what's funny that you think is funny and to understand you. And so when you're with someone, if they talk really soft and low, you want to talk soft and low. If you come at them and you're talking a million miles a minute and you're loud and in their face, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I could never work with that person. On the flip side, I tend to be a fast talker, and when I get around people who are really slow talkers, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can handle this. Like, I need people to move fast because it's what I feel comfortable with. And so you have to realize that when someone is coming to purchase something from you, you need to adapt to their style, and you need to make sure that you are communicating with them in a way that they can understand and they can really adapt to. The other thing that's really important in a booth space is to smile. If you're sitting there smiling in your booth space, people are going to walk by and they're going to smile back. They're going to feel welcomed into your space, and so I would just recommend that. Everybody loves to smile, and it's a great connector. Okay, booth space etiquette. So you're in your space. It's really important to not do these things. So don't eat, don't drink, don't talk on your cell phone, don't use your computer, don't play video games, don't check Facebook a million times, your personal page, unless you're posting about the show. And we also recommend that you don't sell in the aisle. So if your booth space is here, I would recommend standing right here, but don't stand in the aisle. So it's just really important to observe these things. We have a VIP lounge set up aside. I would recommend taking breaks throughout the day. We'll have snacks and things. Go take a break, eat in there. When you're eating in your booth space, people definitely do not want to interrupt you. They think, oh my gosh, that person's busy, they're taking a break, I'm not going to come talk to them. That's not what we want. We want them to come. Now, obviously, if you're serving food, little different. We want you to eat, but in a home and garden or home professional booth space, do not eat. The other thing is talking on your phone. I know that our phones are like our third hand to most of us, but put it in your purse, leave it in your car. It is so bad to talk on your phone in your booth space. You're totally not engaged at all with the attendees when you're on your phone. And so I would recommend turning it off, telling everyone you won't have your phone with you for a few hours, check it on your break. Just don't get on it. And then the other thing I would say is to make sure that you don't play games on your computer or phone, because those really do hinder your ability to focus on what you're doing.